The early days of Isis's story often linger on the feeling of her presence, not in the great halls of temples or in battles of the gods, but in quiet, ordinary images that listeners could hold gently in their minds. They spoke of her standing at the edge of the river, dipping her hands into the water and watching the ripples spread outward in circles, slow and endless. They imagined her voice as soft as the evening wind that moves through papyrus reeds. To think of Isis was to think of a figure who did not command with thunder or with fire, but instead guided, soothed, and healed with patience. Her powers were not loud, but subtle, steady, and enduring. She was, even from the very beginning, the kind of presence that stayed, never fading, never leaving. Osiris, her brother, shared this gentle nature. He was the one who, in later tales, would teach humankind how to farm, how to tend to wheat and barley, how to prepare bread and beer, how to live in harmony with the turning of the Nile. But in these earliest moments, Osiris and Isis were not yet rulers, not yet parents, not yet figures of worship spread across the Mediterranean. They were simply a pair of divine siblings, children of the earth and sky, growing in the household of gods, learning the ways of power and patience. Their sister, Nephthys, quiet and reserved, often stood at the edge of the stories like a shadow that never quite left but never stepped into the light either. And their brother Set, restless and unpredictable, already carried the seeds of conflict within him. Where Isis was calm and healing, Set was noisy and destructive. Where Isis created, Set tore apart. Their family was whole and broken at the same time, bound together by the ties of birth, yet destined for struggle. But in these early times, before the sharp lines of conflict hardened, they still existed as a family of children beneath their mother Nut's endless sky. The Egyptians imagined Nut stretched across the heavens like a great body of stars, her hands and feet touching the horizons, her form arching over the earth. Geb lay below, the solid ground, and between them their children lived and moved. For Isis, this meant her life was always tied to the balance between sky and earth, between the infinite above and the steady foundation below. She was the child of both, and she carried both qualities, the endless patience of the ground beneath one's feet and the infinite reach of the sky's vault overhead. When people later spoke of Isis as a goddess of magic, they meant something deeper than tricks or illusions. For the Egyptians, magic Heko was the power that ran through the world itself, the force that gave words meaning, that made rituals powerful, that allowed healing to take place. Isis became the mistress of this force, not through sudden violence or conquest, but through learning, through patience, through listening to the secrets of the world. She gathered knowledge the way a mother gathers herbs, carefully, gently, with attention to detail. Her magic was not thunderous, but steady, like the Nile's flood that returned every year without fail, bringing life to the fields. In the quiet retellings, she is often described as watching, always watching. She watched her brother Osiris with gentle admiration. She watched the movements of her sister Nephthys with affection. She even watched Set, restless and angry, not with hatred, but with an awareness that one day she would need to understand him more deeply than anyone else could. To watch, to observe, to see with patience, these were her earliest traits, and they would remain with her forever. The throne she wore upon her head was more than just a symbol of kingship. It was a reminder that Isis herself was the support of rule, the foundation upon which power could rest. Kings of Egypt would later take her as their divine mother, imagining themselves seated upon her lap, nourished by her care, guided by her wisdom. Even before she became the mother of Horus, Isis was already imagined as the universal mother, the seat upon which kingship itself rested. To rest upon Isis was to rest upon the stability of the world, the gentle balance that kept life from falling into chaos. The people who told these stories were farmers, fishermen, herders, and laborers. They knew the feel of soil in their hands, the sound of birds at dawn, the slow rhythm of planting and harvest. When they spoke of Isis, they described her in the same rhythms, weaving her story into their daily lives. She was a goddess who belonged. She was as close as the murmur of a lullaby, and as steady as the rising of the sun. To fall asleep to her story was to imagine her as a mother bending over her child, singing softly, whispering gently. Her story became a lullaby in itself. She was a goddess of great power, but her power was quiet, her magic woven from patience and love. Even as a young goddess in the earliest stories, she was already the one who healed, who comforted, who endured. The Egyptians often repeated her names in long lists, each one adding another layer to her presence. They would call her the Great One, the Divine, the Thrice Mighty, the Ever-Living, the Mother of Kings, the Lady of Words, the Mistress of the Two Lands, the Queen of the Sky. Each name was like a soft echo, reinforcing her presence, drawing the listener deeper into the steady rhythm of her story. Repetition itself was a kind of magic, a way to lull the mind, to carry it into sleep. As the world of the gods settled into its rhythm, Isis stood beside Osiris more often. Their bond was not sudden, not fiery, but steady and enduring. They became companions, partners, reflections of one another. Where Osiris ruled with justice, Isis guided with wisdom. Where Osiris gave life to the fields, Isis gave healing to the people. Together they were imagined as the model of harmony, the pair who balanced one another perfectly. But this balance existed in the fragile stillness before Set's restlessness broke it apart. For now, though, their union was peaceful, their days quiet, their story gentle. The Egyptians loved to describe scenes of stillness, Osiris and Isis seated side by side upon a throne, holding hands, their faces calm, their eyes steady. Behind them, the symbols of kingship and queenship stood tall. Around them, the world thrived, the Nile flooding on time, the crops growing tall, the people living in harmony. These were not stories of adventure or war, but of order, of peace, of balance. To listen to them was to feel reassured that the world would continue as it always had, steady and reliable. In these beginnings, Isis was not yet the mourning widow, not yet the mother fleeing into the marshes, not yet the goddess who stitched together the broken body of Osiris. She was simply the presence of care and wisdom, the figure who stood beside her family, watching, learning, waiting. Her story moved slowly, not rushing toward tragedy, but unfolding gently, like the steady unfolding of dawn across the eastern horizon. The first part of her story ends not with action, but with presence. Isis stands quietly in the company of her brothers and sister, beneath the endless sky of Nut, upon the solid ground of Geb. She is already known as the mistress of words, the healer, the mother-to-be of kings, though those roles have not yet come to pass. She is simply there, constant, patient, enduring. To listen to her story is to rest, to drift, to feel the quiet strength of her presence, moving gently like the river, steady and unhurried, eternal and calm. When the stories of Isis moved into her youth, they began to show her not only as a daughter of the sky and earth, but also as a figure who learned to shape the rhythms of the world around her. She grew into her place beside Osiris, not suddenly, not with drama, but with a gradual unfolding, like the slow opening of a lotus flower in the morning light. The Egyptians told these stories without haste, letting each image linger, allowing the listeners to rest in the calm repetition of her presence. To hear about Isis was to feel the gentle passage of time, each moment settling softly upon the next. Osiris had already become known as a figure of order and civilization. In the tales, he was the one who brought agriculture to Egypt, who taught people to plant wheat and barley, to harvest carefully, to grind flour and bake bread, to brew beer from grain and share it with neighbors. Osiris was the teacher of law, the bringer of harmony, the king whose justice spread across the two lands. Isis stood beside him, not in the shadows, not as a passive figure, but as the companion who gave his work stability, who added wisdom to his justice, who brought compassion to his rule. Together, they made a pair that was complete, each balancing the other. The people who told these stories described Isis in simple ways that carried deep meaning. They said she listened. She listened to the cries of infants, to the worries of farmers, to the songs of boatmen on the Nile. She listened to the voices of the sick and the weary. Listening itself was a kind of magic, and Isis became the goddess who paid attention, who noticed what others might overlook. Her care was woven not only into grand spells, but also into the smallest details of daily life. When a family prayed to Isis, they were asking her to notice them, to hold them in her patient awareness, to keep them safe beneath her steady gaze. Her presence in these early times was not fiery or commanding, but gentle and continuous. She was imagined as moving among her people quietly, like a soft breeze in the reeds. She did not need to shout to be heard, for her care was constant, and her constancy was power enough. The throne upon her head was not just a symbol of kingship, but a reminder that no ruler stood alone. Behind every throne, behind every seat of power, there was support, patience, and care. Isis was that support. Without her, no throne could stand. The Egyptians described the reign of Osiris and Isis as a golden age. The Nile flooded in its proper season, the fields grew green, and the people prospered. There were no wars, no famines, no chaos. This was the time of balance, of Maat, when order and harmony ruled. In these stories, Isis took part in every aspect of this harmony. She walked among the people, teaching them how to weave cloth from flax, how to spin thread, how to use herbs for healing. She was the goddess of skill and knowledge, and her wisdom touched even the simplest parts of life. To imagine her in these days was to imagine a figure moving quietly among the huts and fields, guiding hands, offering comfort, bringing healing. Her sister, Nephthys, remained close to her, a companion who shared in her patience. Nephthys was often described as shadow to Isis's light, quiet and watchful, a presence that did not draw attention but that always remained near. The two sisters, together, were often called upon in prayers, for they balanced one another, just as day balances night, just as joy balances sorrow. In these early times, their companionship was strong, and Isis leaned upon Nephthys as one leans upon a trusted friend. But even in this golden age, there was a shadow. Set, their brother, restless and jealous, watched the harmony of Osiris and Isis with bitterness. Where Osiris ruled with calm justice and Isis offered healing wisdom, Set roamed the desert, angry and unsettled. He was the storm, the chaos, the dryness of the barren land. He could not rest in peace or harmony, for his nature was to disturb, to unsettle, to break apart what was whole. Though his role in the great tragedy had not yet come, his presence already lingered at the edges of the story, like a wind rising in the distance. For now, though, Isis remained untouched by grief. She was a young queen, standing beside Osiris, watching over their people, guiding them with patience. The Egyptians loved to imagine the details of her daily life in this age. They pictured her seated in the shade of a palm tree, weaving linen on a simple loom, her fingers moving steadily back and forth. They pictured her gathering herbs in the marshes, bending low to pluck roots and leaves, whispering their names softly, for to name a plant was to awaken its healing power. They pictured her walking at Osiris's side, her hand resting gently upon his arm, her presence lending him strength and calm. These images were not told with excitement or urgency, but with slowness, each detail settling like sand upon the riverbank, forming a steady picture. To speak of Isis was to invite stillness. Her story was not meant to stir the blood, but to quiet the heart. It was a story that could be told at night by the glow of a small lamp to lull listeners into rest in time. Isis became more than just a queen beside Osiris. She became the mother-to-be of Egypt itself, the figure who embodied nurturing and care. Even before the birth of Horus, she was already spoken of as the one who mothered the land, who sheltered its people, who protected them from harm. Her motherhood was not limited to her own child, but extended to every person who prayed to her, every king who claimed her as his divine mother, every family who whispered her name in moments of fear. She was mother to all, and her care was endless. The Egyptians also spoke of her as the mistress of magic, the one who knew the hidden names of things. In their belief, to know a name was to hold power over it. Isis was the one who gathered these names, who listened carefully to the whispers of the world, who learned the secret words that could heal wounds, cure illness, calm storms, and protect the dead in their journey through the afterlife. She did not shout these words or wield them like weapons. Instead, she held them quietly, using them when needed, speaking softly, weaving spells like lullabies. Her magic was not violent but protective, not fierce but patient. Listeners who heard these stories might have felt her presence, even in their daily lives. They might have imagined her standing beside them as they worked in the fields, her quiet strength supporting their labor. They might have pictured her watching over their children at night, guarding them from harm, whispering protective words as they slept. Isis was close, never far away. Her care was constant, her magic steady, her presence enduring. The story of Isis in her youth is less about events and more about atmosphere. It is about a time when Egypt was whole, when the gods themselves walked in harmony, when the land was rich and the people lived in peace. It is about Isis, as a young goddess, growing into her role, learning her magic, supporting Osiris, caring for her people. It is about stillness, patience, and love. And so the story continues slowly, without haste. Isis sits beside Osiris upon the throne, her face calm, her eyes steady. Around them, the world thrives. The Nile rises and falls in its rhythm. The fields grow green. The people sing as they work. In this golden age, Isis is the presence that makes everything steady, the one who listens, the one who heals, the one who endures. Her story flows as gently as the river itself, carrying listeners into rest, into quiet, into sleep. The golden age of Osiris and Isis was told as if it had no beginning and no end, a long season of harmony where time itself seemed to move slowly, like the steady current of the Nile. When listeners settled into these stories, they were not carried into battles or adventures, but into images of peace and calm. They were invited to imagine a palace of quiet dignity, a land filled with green fields, and a people who lived without fear. In this gentle world, Isis sat beside Osiris, her presence as constant as the rising sun, her hands and heart always turned toward healing, protection, and care. Osiris was the king, but his rule was never complete without Isis. The Egyptians described kingship as a seat, a throne, and the throne itself was Isis. Without her, no ruler could sit, no power could rest. She was the foundation of authority, the one who steadied the king, the one who supported him from within. Together, they became an inseparable pair, not just in love, but in duty, each balancing the other's gifts. Osiris brought justice, Isis brought wisdom. Osiris gave order, Isis gave care. Osiris ruled with law, Isis ruled with compassion. The palace they shared was imagined as a place not of luxury, but of balance. Its walls were painted with calm colors, its halls filled with the sound of quiet footsteps and the laughter of servants at their work. Within these halls, Isis moved softly, her presence bringing peace to all who passed her. She was not a queen who ruled from distance, but one who walked among her people, touching their lives in simple, ordinary ways. A word of encouragement here, a gentle healing there, a blessing spoken over a newborn child, a prayer whispered for the safety of a fisherman setting out at dawn. Listeners were invited to picture the everyday rhythm of her reign. In the mornings, Isis might walk along the gardens of the palace, the air still cool, the birds beginning their songs. She would move slowly, her hands brushing against the leaves, her eyes watching the sunlight gather across the water. In the afternoons, she might sit beside Osiris, listening as he judged disputes, her presence a steady reminder of fairness and compassion. In the evenings, she might weave at her loom, the soft sound of the shuttle moving back and forth, filling the air like a lullaby. These images were not told quickly, but allowed to stretch, each one lingering long enough for the listener to drift, to imagine, to rest. The harmony of their reign spread beyond the palace walls. Farmers felt it in the steadiness of the Nile, which rose and fell in its rhythm, bringing rich silt to the fields. Families felt it in the abundance of food, in the grain that filled their baskets, in the bread that baked in their ovens. Fishermen felt it in the calm waters, merchants in the safe roads, children in the laughter that filled their homes. To live under Osiris and Isis was to live in a world of balance, a world where care and justice walked hand in hand. In these years, Isis also became known more deeply as the mistress of healing. The Egyptians imagined her walking through the villages, gathering herbs, whispering their names, preparing poultices and drinks that eased pain and restored strength. They imagined her bending over the sick, her hands cool upon their foreheads, her voice soft as she spoke words of comfort. Healing was not only a matter of herbs and spells, but of presence, and Isis's presence was the greatest healing of all. She was the assurance that suffering was seen, that pain was not forgotten, that care was always near. She also became known as the guardian of children. Mothers prayed to Isis for protection, asking her to shield their infants from sickness, from snakes, from the dangers of the world. They believed that Isis herself would bend over their cradles, whispering blessings, weaving spells of safety. In these prayers, Isis became more than a goddess of kings and palaces. She became a mother to every household, a presence felt in the quietest corners of daily life. Her sister Nephthys remained beside her, a shadow and a companion. Together they formed a pair of guardians, called upon in rituals, invoked in hymns. Where Isis was light, Nephthys was shade. Where Isis was presence, Nephthys was mystery. Yet together they formed a circle of protection, a completeness that held both joy and sorrow, both day and night. Their companionship was quiet but strong, a thread woven into every telling of Isis's story. Even as harmony reigned, Set lingered at the edges. He was the desert wind, dry and restless. He was the storm that rose without warning. He was the voice of jealousy, whispering in the shadows of the palace. For now, he had not yet acted, but his presence was always there, a reminder that balance is never free from the threat of disruption. Listeners who heard the story of Isis and Osiris's golden age were invited to savor its peace, knowing that sorrow would come, that loss would break the stillness, that the quiet harmony would not last forever. But for the moment, all was calm, and Isis was the heart of that calm. The Egyptians often described Isis with lists of names and titles, each one adding weight to her presence. They called her the Great One, the Divine Mother, the Mistress of the Two Lands, the Queen of Heaven, the Lady of Spells, the One who knows names, the One who heals, the One who endures. Each name was spoken slowly, like beads on a string, each one reinforcing her place in the minds of the listeners. Repetition itself was a kind of magic, and the repetition of her names was a spell of comfort, lulling the mind, softening the heart, leading the listener deeper into stillness. The story of her reign with Osiris became, in time, a story of memory. Later generations would look back upon it as an age of perfection, a time when Egypt was whole, when order reigned, when care was constant. They would tell it at night, by firelight, in the quiet hours before sleep, as a way of recalling what harmony feels like, as a way of resting in the thought of balance. For Isis was not only a goddess of power, but a goddess of memory, the one who preserved what was broken, the one who remembered what was lost, the one who carried forward the knowledge of peace even into times of sorrow. In this part of her story, before grief touched her, Isis stands as a figure of completeness. She is the queen beside Osiris, the healer among her people, the mother to all, the mistress of magic, the guardian of balance. She is not distant, not unreachable, but near, present in every part of life. To imagine her is to imagine care itself given form, patience given a face, love given a voice. She was not loud, not fierce, but steady, enduring, eternal. And so the story lingers here, in the palace of peace, in the golden age of Osiris and Isis. The river flows, the fields grow, the people prosper, the gods themselves dwell in harmony. Isis sits quietly beside Osiris, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes calm, her presence unshaken. Around her, the world rests. To hear her story is to rest with it, to let the calm of her reign settle over the heart like a gentle blanket, to drift with the rhythm of her patience, to fall into the deep stillness of sleep. The reign of Osiris and Isis was remembered as a time of balance, a season when the Nile gave its gifts without struggle, when the people lived in peace, and when the throne of Egypt was steady beneath the weight of care and wisdom. Yet even within the most harmonious age, there lingers the presence of restlessness. For balance is always shadowed by imbalance, and peace is always shadowed by envy. In the story of Isis, that shadow took its form in Set, the brother of Osiris, the god of the desert, the storm, and the untamed wilds. Set's presence was not created for harmony. He was the howl of the dry wind, the violence of the storm, the disordered energy that cannot sit still. Where Osiris embodied order and cultivation, Set embodied disruption and raw force. The Egyptians did not imagine him as wholly evil, for he too was part of the divine order necessary to the cycle of life. But he was restless, difficult, unable to live content within the balance established by Osiris and Isis. Listeners were invited to picture him standing at the edges of the green land, watching. Beyond the fertile valley stretched the desert, endless, hot, dry, unforgiving. That desert was Set's domain, and it stood as the opposite of the Nile's abundance. The people of Egypt depended on the river, on the green ribbon of life that wound its way across their land. Without the river, there was only sand, dryness, and death. Set's very nature reminded the people that harmony was fragile, that beyond every field of grain lay an expanse of emptiness, waiting to take back what had been given. To tell the story of Isis and Osiris was not to erase Set, but to acknowledge his shadow, to know that even in peace there lingered the seeds of disruption. In these years of quiet rule, Set's jealousy began to grow. He saw the reverence the people gave Osiris and Isis, the hymns sung in their honor, the offerings placed before their shrines. He heard the laughter of children who were told stories of the kind queen, the faithful mother, the healer of all. He saw the peace that filled the land and felt it not as a comfort but as an irritation, a reminder of his own distance from the harmony he could not create. The more the people prospered, the more restless Set became. Envy works slowly, like a seed placed in dry soil. At first it is small, unnoticed, a tiny root beneath the surface, but with time it grows, twisting itself deeper, hardening, feeding on the light it resents. Set's envy grew in this way, quietly, steadily, until it consumed him. The Egyptians told his nature with images of violence and disorder. They spoke of him as the Red One, as the god of strange beasts, as the one who roared with the sound of storms. His anger was not always destructive. Sometimes it was necessary, for storms bring change. Winds clear away stagnation and conflict. prevents stillness from becoming weakness. But when turned toward envy, Set's force became dangerous. A threat not just to the balance of gods, but to the lives of all who lived under their rule. Osiris, in his calm and generous nature, did not see the depth of Set's jealousy. He ruled with fairness, believing that harmony could endure, that his brother's restlessness would find its place, that the family of gods would remain united. Isis, more watchful, may have sensed the tension. In some tellings, she is portrayed as the one who notices shadows others ignore, the one who pays attention to the hidden movement beneath the surface. But her role was not to act hastily. She embodied patience and wisdom, and her patience allowed the story to unfold as it did. For sometimes, wisdom is not to prevent sorrow, but to endure it, to transform it into something lasting. Listeners might imagine Set wandering the halls of the palace, his steps heavy, his eyes sharp, his heart filled with restless energy. He looked at the throne and saw not a symbol of balance, but a prize he believed should be his. He looked at Isis and saw not a queen of healing, but a partner who strengthened Osiris, who steadied him, who gave him power beyond reach. The more he looked, the deeper his resentment grew. Set's envy was not only for the throne, but for the bond between Osiris and Isis. For their harmony was a kind of power he could not touch. The Egyptians told the tale with a slow unfolding of moods. They did not rush to the violence that would come. They allowed listeners to sit with the image of envy itself, to feel how it grows, how it shifts from irritation to resentment, from resentment to bitterness, from bitterness to a plan. In this way, the story became a meditation on human experience as well. For jealousy is not limited to gods. It can be felt in any household, between brothers, between neighbors, between friends. To tell of Set's jealousy was to reflect on the fragility of harmony in all things, to acknowledge that even peace carries the risk of disruption. In the background of these myths, the land itself mirrored the tension. The Nile continued its rhythm, but beyond its banks, the desert stretched wide and empty, a constant reminder of the difference between abundance and desolation. When the wind blew across the sands, it carried the sound of Set's domain, a harsh whistle, a dry roar, a voice that reminded people of his presence. Even in times of plenty, the desert was near. Even in times of harmony, Set was near. Isis, meanwhile, continued her life of care, healing the sick, blessing the children, supporting Osiris in his rule. She did not act as though danger pressed upon her, for her wisdom was not rooted in fear, but in endurance. She knew, perhaps, that sorrow comes to every life, that even gods are not spared from loss. Her strength was not in preventing grief, but in carrying it, not in avoiding trials, but in transforming them into stories of survival. When listeners heard of Isis in these days, they heard of her patience, her calm, her steady hand, and her unshaken presence beside Osiris. The story of Set's jealousy began to take shape as a plan. He did not strike suddenly, but waited, watching, for a moment when his restlessness could be turned into action. He thought not only of himself, but of how to draw others into his cause. For envy often seeks company. It grows stronger when shared, when whispered into the ears of those who also harbor resentment. Set began to gather allies, gods and spirits, who felt overlooked, who longed for recognition, who were willing to stand with him against Osiris. In the shadows, plans were spoken. In the silence of the night, conspiracies were formed. The Egyptians told this part of the story not with sudden drama, but with quiet inevitability. Just as the river rises each year, just as the desert wind always returns, so too would conflict come. The harmony of Osiris and Isis was real, but it was not eternal. The balance they embodied was strong, but balance always shifts. Set's envy was not a surprise, but a part of the cycle, as natural as the flood and the drought, as the day and the night. To fall asleep listening to this tale was to rest in the rhythm of inevitability, to know that even sorrow has its place, and that even loss is part of the order of things. And so the story lingered here, with the palace still at peace, with Isis still weaving her care into the lives of the people, with Osiris still ruling in justice, but with the shadow of Set growing longer. His jealousy was now a presence that could not be ignored. It walked behind him like a shadow on the desert sand, stretching farther with each day. The listeners knew what would come, though the story had not yet spoken it aloud. They could feel the tension gathering, like clouds before a storm, heavy and inevitable. Set's jealousy was the turning point in the myth of Isis. From this seed of envy would grow the act that shattered harmony, the grief that transformed Isis into the goddess of mourning and the goddess of resurrection, the sorrow that would give birth to hope. But for now, the story remained here, in the quiet before the storm, in the slow unfolding of envy, in the restless heart of a god who could not find peace. The Egyptians told these myths to help their listeners rest not by avoiding sorrow, but by accepting it as part of the cycle. Just as the Nile brings both flood and renewal, so to do the stories bring both harmony and disruption. To fall asleep to the tale of Isis and Osiris was to fall into the rhythm of life itself, to rest in the certainty that even when peace is broken, care endures, and even when envy rises, love remains. And so the story lingers, soft and steady, with Isis seated beside Osiris, with Set standing in the shadows, with envy taking root, with the balance of the world waiting to shift. The palace is still, the fields are green, the river flows, but in the silence of the night, a storm waits at the edges, patient and certain. The palace still stood in calm, and the green fields still stretched across the land, and Isis still sat beside Osiris in the quiet dignity of their rule. Yet the shadow that had gathered behind Set now began to move, no longer only a thought or a restless desire, but a plan ready to be carried out. In the minds of the storytellers, this turning point was never told quickly. It was approached with care, as though walking slowly down a long path toward an event that could not be undone. For what was about to happen was not only the end of a reign, but the beginning of sorrow, and with that sorrow, the beginning of the deeper story of Isis. Set's plan was born out of envy, but carried forward with patience. He watched Osiris and studied him. He considered the rhythms of the court, the habits of the king, the places he walked, the times he rested. Set's mind, restless and sharp, turned these observations into a design. The story says that he built a chest, a beautiful chest shaped like a coffin, yet disguised as a gift. It was crafted with care, made to fit the body of Osiris perfectly. Though Osiris did not know this, the chest was decorated, made to appear as a treasure worthy of admiration, something that would draw the attention of the king and those around him. The day came when Set held a feast, inviting Osiris and others to join. The feast was told as a scene of music, laughter, and celebration. The kind of gathering where suspicion would fall away, where trust would rest upon the air. In this atmosphere, Set revealed the chest. He displayed it with pride, drawing the eyes of the guests, letting them admire its beauty, its craftsmanship, its perfect proportions. He announced that he would give it to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. The challenge seemed light-hearted, a game among brothers and companions, a moment of amusement at the heart of the feast. One by one, the guests tried. They lay down in the chest, stretching their arms, pressing their shoulders, but none fit perfectly. Each was too tall or too short, too broad or too narrow. The game brought laughter, for it seemed harmless, just another part of the celebration. Finally, Osiris stepped forward. He was the king, and he moved with the confidence of one who had nothing to fear. He lay down inside the chest, and as Set had planned, Osiris fit exactly. The chest closed around him as though made for him, for indeed it was. The moment was silent, the pause before the act. Then, quickly, Set and his conspirators slammed the lid shut. They fastened it tightly, sealing it with nails, sealing it with molten lead, ensuring there was no escape. In an instant, the chest was no longer a gift but a coffin, no longer a treasure but a prison. Osiris, the king of peace, the bringer of harmony, was trapped within. Set's laughter turned dark as he and his companions lifted the chest, carried it swiftly, and hurled it into the waters of the Nile. The river received it. He had ruled, away from the queen who had sat beside him, away from the harmony that had been his gift to Egypt. The listeners were not rushed through this moment. They were allowed to sit with the silence that followed, to imagine the stillness of the palace when the news spread, to feel the absence that filled the halls. The reign of Osiris had ended, and Isis was left in grief. Her sorrow became the center of the story, and her voice, soft and steady, became the sound of mourning for all time. Isis was not a goddess who expressed her grief with violent cries. Her sorrow was deep and quiet, like the slow rising of dark water. She mourned Osiris with patience, with endurance, with a love that did not collapse under weight, but stretched across time. The Egyptians imagined her wandering the palace, her hands trailing along the walls, her eyes filled with silence. They imagined her stepping into the gardens, where the flowers seemed to wither in sympathy, where the air itself grew heavy. They imagined her sitting alone at the loom, the threads unmoving, the shuttle stilled, as though even her craft could not continue without him. Her mourning was not only for herself. She mourned for Egypt, for the people who had lived in peace beneath Osiris's rule, for the balance that had been broken, for the harmony that had slipped away. Who embodied all grief, all loss, all sorrow that comes when love is taken. The people of Egypt saw in her mourning their own losses reflected, and in telling her story, they gave voice to the universal truth that sorrow belongs to all. The chest drifted, carried by the river, leaving Egypt and entering the wider world. The Nile bore it through reeds and bends, past villages and fields, past fishermen casting their nets, past children playing on the banks, until it was lost to sight. For Isis, the loss was not only of Osiris, but of his body, of the form she could hold, of the presence she could touch. Her grief was doubled. for she had been robbed not only of his life, but of the place where her mourning could rest. She could not bury him, could not perform the rites, could not lay him gently into the earth with the words of magic and the blessings of care. He was gone, and with him went the foundation of her world. The Egyptians imagined her setting out to search, her feet bare, her garments plain, her presence wandering like a widow across the land. She asked the people if they had seen the chest, if they had seen where the river had carried it. She moved with determination, but also with patience, for her grief did not drive her into frenzy, but into endurance. She walked slowly, step by step, each movement a prayer, each breath a vow that she would not cease until she found him. Her search became part of the great rhythm of her story, and in it listeners heard the truth of devotion. For Isis was not only the goddess of healing and magic, but of loyalty, of love that does not end with death, of faithfulness that endures beyond the grave. Her grief was not weakness, but strength. Her sorrow, not despair, but persistence. She carried her mourning as one carries a sacred flame, steady, unwavering, guiding her through the darkness. The story of Osiris's death was not told with sudden violence, but with slow unfolding, so that those who heard it might feel the weight of inevitability and the depth of endurance. The Egyptians did not need to be reminded of death, for it was always near, but they needed to be reminded of love's persistence. Isis's mourning gave them this reminder. Her tears became the river itself. Her laments became the winds that moved through the reeds. Her silence became the stillness of the night sky. Set, having carried out his plan, believed he had won. He stood in triumph, claiming the throne, surrounding himself with allies, filling the palace with his restless presence. But even in this moment of apparent victory, the story turned quietly toward Isis, for her grief was stronger than his envy, her patience more enduring than his violence. The tale of Set's triumph was only the surface. Beneath it, Isis was already shaping the deeper truth, the truth of love that does not die. The listeners, drifting into sleep, would carry with them the image of Isis standing alone beneath the night sky, her face lifted, her eyes filled with silent determination. They would see her stepping into the darkness, following the path of the river, seeking the chest, seeking the body, seeking the man who had been her partner. Her sorrow was heavy, but it was also a light guiding her through the uncertainty of loss. And so this part of the story ends, not with resolution, but with grief. Osiris is gone, sealed within the chest, carried by the river into the unknown. Isis remains, her mourning filling the world with silence, her devotion carrying her into the long search. The palace is empty, the throne abandoned, the land waiting. The harmony of the golden age has been broken, and the goddess of care has become the goddess of sorrow. Yet even here, in this moment of loss, the story carries with it the seed of hope. For Isis's grief is not the end, but the beginning. Not despair, but endurance. Not silence, but the first note of the long song that will carry her into eternity. The Nile moved in silence, carrying its waters in the ancient rhythm that had been its nature for longer than memory. Along its banks, reeds swayed in the breeze, bending and rising, whispering their soft music. Fishermen cast their nets. Children played with small boats of reeds. Women bent at the water to wash their baskets. And the steady sound of life carried on as it had always done. Yet, somewhere, upon its current, hidden from the sight of ordinary eyes, drifted the chest that carried Osiris, and with it drifted the broken harmony of Egypt. For though the river nourished the land, it had also become the bearer of grief, carrying away the body of the king and leaving Isis in sorrow. When she learned of what had happened, Isis did not cry out in frenzy. Her mourning was quiet, steady, deep as the river itself. She stood for a long time in stillness, her hands pressed to her face, her body heavy with sorrow. Yet when she lifted her eyes again, there was resolve within them. She would not sit in the palace and let her grief consume her. She would go out into the world. She would walk along the river. She would search every reed, every bend, every shore. She would not rest until she found the chest that carried her husband. Her mourning became a vow, and her vow became her path. The Egyptians remembered her as wandering barefoot, clothed in simple garments, her hair falling loose, her face marked by sorrow, but also by determination. She did not go in a royal procession, did not take servants or guards. She went as a widow, alone, guided not by power, but by devotion. In this way, she became close to the people, for they too knew the feeling of setting out in search of something lost, of refusing to let grief end the story. Isis was divine, yet in her wandering, she was also human, her sorrow the same as theirs, her endurance the same as theirs. The Nile was long, and its waters flowed through villages and marshes, through stretches of fertile fields and wide banks of reeds. Each place she passed was given a moment in the story, for the Egyptians told her journey not as a single swift act, but as a long unfolding, where each step mattered, each stop carried weight. They imagined her speaking with farmers, asking if they had seen a chest carried by the current. They imagined her speaking with fishermen, her voice soft, her eyes steady, inquiring whether their nets had caught sight of anything strange. They imagined her resting at the edge of the river, her hands touching the water, whispering her sorrow into its depths, asking it to give back what it had taken. The river itself became part of the story. Its flow was her companion, its bends, her path, its waters, her mirror. She looked into it and saw her own reflection, pale with grief, patient with endurance. She followed its sound, the constant murmur, the endless moving, a reminder that time does not stop, that life carries on, that love must move forward even in the shadow of loss. For Isis, the river was both a thief and a guide, the one that had carried Osiris away and the one that would lead her to him again. Her wandering was not without hardship. The marshes were thick with insects, the heat pressed heavily, the nights were cold and filled with the sound of creatures. She walked with bare feet through mud, through thorns, through sands. She lay her head upon rough ground, her cloak wrapped around her against the chill, yet she did not falter. Her endurance was not the endurance of comfort, but the endurance of devotion, the strength that comes from love, the persistence that does not break. The Egyptians imagined her suffering these trials, not with despair, but with calm, as though every hardship was a necessary step, a part of the ritual of mourning, a part of the long path toward restoration. Sometimes she was joined by her sister, Nephthys, who came quietly, offering her companionship. Together they walked, two figures in mourning, their presence a balance of light and shadow, day and night, comfort and sorrow. Nephthys spoke little, but her presence was steady, a reminder that grief is not born alone, that even in the darkest search there can be companionship. Listeners were invited to rest in this image, to imagine the two sisters walking side by side along the riverbanks, their steps slow, their garments brushing against the reeds, their silence filled with meaning, thought in her wandering. Isis was also remembered as using her magic. She was not only a queen and a widow, but the mistress of spells, the goddess of knowledge, the one who knew the hidden names of things. She whispered incantations to the river, calling upon its currents to reveal their secrets. She sang to the reeds, asking them to bend and show her the way. She prayed to the wind, asking it to carry her search to distant lands. Her magic was not fierce or violent, but quiet, woven into her patience, shaped by her devotion. She did not demand, she asked. She did not command, she listened. Her magic was the same as her presence, steady, soft, enduring. The story tells that the chest drifted far, carried out of Egypt and into foreign lands, reaching the coast where the waters left it among the branches of a great tree. But Isis did not yet know this. She searched still, moving step by step, day by day, following the path of the river as far as it carried her. Each night she lay beneath the stars, her heart heavy but unbroken, her body weary but unyielding. She prayed to Osiris, speaking his name softly, telling him she would find him, telling him to wait for her, telling him that death could not sever the bond they shared. The Egyptians heard in her journey a reflection of their own funerary rituals, the search for the body, the care given to the dead, the belief that love continues even beyond death. In Isis's wandering, they saw the truth of their own mourning. To lose someone is to begin a search, not only for the body, but for meaning, for memory, for a way to hold love when presence is gone. Isis's journey became their journey, her patience their comfort, her vow their assurance. The land itself seemed to mourn with her. The winds slowed, the fields grew quiet, the animals moved gently, as though the whole of nature had felt the loss of Osiris and moved in sympathy with the queen who wandered. The air was filled with her sorrow, yet also with her determination. Even the gods were silent, watching as Isis walked, her grief shaping the path of myth, her endurance shaping the meaning of love. She was remembered also as resting in the villages, sitting with the women, blessing their children, healing their sick, even as she searched. Her mourning did not take away her care, but deepened it. She moved among the people as one who knew their sorrow, as one who carried grief herself. Her hands touched the sick, her words comforted the weary. Her presence reminded them that even in loss there is love, even in death there is devotion. Her wandering was not only a search for Osiris, but a gift to those who crossed her path, a reminder that care continues, even in grief. The slow rhythm of her journey made the story suitable for telling at night, for the listener could follow her steps, one after another, along the quiet banks of the Nile, through the reeds, across the sands, beneath the stars. Each step became a breath, each pause a moment of rest, each word a lull in the long unfolding of the tale. The mind could wander with her, following the gentle sound of her voice, the soft rhythm of her feet, the endless patience of her search. And so her wandering stretched on, day after day, night after night, a long path of devotion. She did not yet find Osiris, but she did not cease. Her grief remained, but it was grief that moved forward, grief that endured, grief that became love's path. The listeners knew that her search would continue, that it would carry her beyond Egypt, that it would lead her into new trials, new disguises, new acts of patience. But for now, the story lingered here, with Isis walking along the river, her eyes scanning the waters, her voice whispering prayers, her presence filling the land with mourning and with hope. The Nile flowed, the reeds swayed, the stars turned. Above, and Isis walked. The chest was far away, resting now in a foreign land, but Isis's devotion was nearer than distance, stronger than loss, deeper than time. Her wandering had only begun, and in its beginning, the listeners found rest, carried by the slow rhythm of her steps, by the steady flow of her sorrow, by the enduring presence of her love. The waters of the Nile did not stop their moving, and neither did the seas that received them. Beyond Egypt, where the river met the salt waves, the chest that carried Osiris drifted still, borne upon the tides. Its journey was not hurried, but slow, carried by the patient hands of the current. Day became night, night became day, and the chest floated, unseen, until at last it reached the shores of a distant land. There, at the edge of the coast of Byblus, the waves left it upon the sand. In time, a great tree grew around it, as though nature itself wished to guard what it held. The trunk rose tall and strong, enclosing the chest within its wood, hiding Osiris in silence. But Isis did not know this yet. She wandered still along the Nile, her steps tireless, her eyes steady, her voice whispering prayers into the reeds. She followed the current to the edge of the sea, and though she did not see the chest vanish into the distance, she felt it. Something in her heart told her the river's path had ended, and the sea had claimed what she sought. She stood upon the shore, the waves washing against her feet, the horizon stretching wide before her. The air carried the smell of salt, the cry of seabirds, the endless movement of the tide. She knew then that her search would not be bound to Egypt alone. Love had carried her beyond her homeland, grief had carried her across waters, and devotion would carry her further still. So she began her journey outward. The Egyptians remembered her as a wanderer who left the familiar banks of the Nile and stepped into the wide world, guided by love and by patience. They told how she disguised herself, covering her divine radiance, taking on the form of a mortal woman so that she might walk among men unnoticed. She became a figure of humility, her garments simple, her presence quiet. She did not wish to announce herself to kings or call upon her divinity with thunder. She wished to move unseen, to search with patience, to find Osiris, not through power, but through love's persistence. The land of Byblus was far from Egypt, but to Isis no distance was too great. She moved through villages, through stretches of coast, across fields where shepherds tended their flocks, along roads where traders carried their goods. In every place, she asked in her soft voice if anyone had seen a chest, if any rumor had passed of something strange carried by the sea. The people she met looked upon her as a weary traveler, a woman marked by sorrow, yet steady in her steps. They offered her bread, water, a place to rest, moved by the quiet dignity of her presence. She accepted little, thanked them with a blessing, and moved onward. At last she came to Byblus, where the city rose with its walls and towers, its harbor filled with ships, its markets busy with trade. Yet she did not enter as a queen, did not declare herself as a goddess. She came as a stranger, sitting by the shore, speaking with those who gathered reeds, listening to the voices of the people. Her sorrow was not hidden, yet it did not weigh her down in despair. It shone in her as something both fragile and strong, something that drew others to her side. It was here that she learned of the great tree that had grown near the palace of the king of Byblus. The people spoke of it with wonder, for its trunk had risen swiftly, its branches wide and strong, its presence a marvel in the land. They spoke also of how the king, Melkart, had ordered the tree to be cut, and how within its trunk they had found a chest, enclosed so deeply that no one could explain its presence. They spoke of how the chest had been taken into the palace, placed as a pillar to support the roof, its beauty admired, its mystery ignored. As Isis listened, her heart grew still, for she knew then that the chest was hers, that within it lay Osiris, hidden in the heart of the palace. Yet she did not rush forward, did not demand it back. She remained in patience, for the way of love is not always the way of force. She took up her place near the palace, disguising herself further, becoming a nursemaid to the queen's children. Her presence in the palace was quiet, unnoticed, her care for the children gentle and steady. She fed them, sang to them, soothed them in the night. Her voice was soft, her hands cool, her eyes watchful. She became beloved in the household, a figure of calm and devotion. No one knew she was Isis. No one guessed she was divine. She was simply a woman marked by sorrow who gave her love to the children in her care. But in her heart, her purpose remained. Each day she passed near the pillar where the chest was hidden, and each day she prayed in silence. She whispered her devotion to Osiris, telling him she was near, telling him she would not abandon him, telling him that even in foreign lands, even beneath the roof of another king, she would find him again. Her waiting became part of the ritual, her patience part of the unfolding. The stories told by the Egyptians lingered on her acts of magic here. They said she burned away the mortality of the queen's child, laying him in the fire to make him immortal as a gift for the kindness shown to her. They said she transformed into a swallow, circling the pillar, crying out in sorrow to Osiris within. They said her spells filled the palace at night, her voice weaving through the halls, her devotion echoing in every chamber. These were not acts of fury, but of longing, not acts of destruction, but of love that could not be stilled in time. The queen discovered her, seeing her magic with the child, and crying out in fear. The fire was quenched, the secret revealed, the presence of Isis known. She cast off her disguise, then revealing herself in her full radiance, her sorrow no longer hidden, her divinity no longer veiled. She spoke of who she was, of what had been done, of the chest that belonged to her. The king and queen, awed by her presence and fearful of her power, granted her the pillar. They allowed her to cut it open, to take what was hidden within. And so, after her long wandering, after her patient disguises, after her devotion through hardship, Isis came once more to Osiris. She opened the pillar, and there, within the chest, she found him. She fell upon it in tears, her arms wrapped around it, her voice breaking in sorrow and in love. She had found him, though he was not yet restored, though death still held him, in silence. Yet in finding him, she had fulfilled her vow. She had followed the Nile, crossed the seas, walked the foreign lands, waited in patience, and at last her devotion had brought her to his side. The Egyptians lingered on this moment, for it was the heart of her story. The journey of grief is long, they said, but love endures. The search may carry us beyond our home, may lead us into disguises, into patience, into silence. Yet, if we do not give up, if we endure, if we carry love, as Isis carried hers, we will find again what was lost, perhaps not as it was before, perhaps not whole, but present, waiting, embraced. Isis's journey was their assurance that no loss is final, that devotion carries across rivers and seas, across death itself. When she left Byblus, she carried the chest with her, guarded by her magic, wrapped in her devotion. The king and queen, who had once admired the pillar, now stood in reverence as she departed, their palace marked forever by the presence of the goddess. She returned again toward Egypt, her steps no longer wandering, her purpose clear, her devotion fulfilled. Osiris was with her, hidden in the chest, silent but present. The long search had ended, and a new chapter of love and loss was about to begin. The story paused there for listeners, letting the rhythm of her journey settle, letting the patience of her devotion echo in their minds. To imagine Isis walking through foreign lands in disguise, tending to children, moving with sorrow yet steady in her purpose, was to imagine love at its most enduring. The chest was heavy, but she bore it with strength, her steps slow, her prayers constant. She had crossed the sea, and now she would return, carrying Osiris back to the land of Egypt, carrying him back to the soil that had once been his throne, carrying him back to the land where grief and devotion would continue their unfolding. The sea waves rolled, the stars turned above, and Isis walked again, her arms around the chest, her heart steady. The story moved onward, but for those who listened, this part lingered like a lull, a place of rest where patience had borne fruit, where love had endured the distance, where sorrow and hope walked together in the quiet steps of a queen who would not abandon her beloved. Isis returned from Byblus with the chest, her arms wrapped around it as though she could shield it from the world. The sea winds brushed against her hair, the waves carried her boat forward. The stars turned overhead as her journey homeward unfolded. She did not rush, though her heart was eager to reach Egypt again. She moved with the same patience that had guided her through every trial, step by step, tide by tide, her love constant, her grief steady, her vow unbroken. When she came again to the shores of Egypt, the land seemed to breathe in her return. The reeds swayed in the wind, the river murmured, the desert sands shimmered in the sun. She stepped ashore and felt the soil beneath her feet, the familiar ground of her homeland, the place where Osiris had once ruled, the place where his presence had shaped the fields and the people. She carried him back, not as a king restored, but as a body, hidden, silent, waiting. Yet, even in silence, his presence filled the land with memory, and Isis with resolve. She knew that the task before her was not yet complete. Finding him was the first step, but restoring him would be a longer path. Seth was still abroad in Egypt, still watching, still filled with hatred. She could not let him know that she had found Osiris, for he would seek to destroy him again. So she carried the chest into the marshes, into the places where the reeds grew tall, where the waters spread wide, where birds called in the dusk. There she hid him, away from prying eyes, guarded by silence and by magic. Each night, she came to him. She opened the chest and knelt beside it, her hands touching the wood, her tears falling upon it, her voice whispering her devotion. She sang her laments, long, slow songs that carried across the reeds, songs that mourned what was lost and promised what would be restored. Her voice was soft, but it filled the marshes, carried by the wind, echoed by the birds. The Egyptians remembered these laments, for they believed the cries of certain birds in the marshes were the echo of Isis's mourning, her voice still alive in the land, still calling to Osiris, still weaving grief and love together in endless song. Her mourning was not only sorrow, but also ritual. She anointed the chest with oils, wrapped it with cloth, performed the gestures of magic that prepared the dead for return. She whispered spells to awaken the life within, to guide Osiris through the darkness, to call back his breath. Each act was careful, deliberate, patient. She did not seek to rush the mysteries of death and rebirth, but honored them step by step, night by night, prayer by prayer. Sometimes Nephthys came to her, moving quietly into the marshes, her presence a shadow. Beside Isis's light, together they mourned, their voices rising in twin laments, their hands joining in the rituals. Nephthys wept with her sister, sharing her grief, though she too had loved Osiris in her way, though she too knew sorrow in the shadow of Seth's cruelty. The two sisters together became a balance, their mourning a harmony, their love a force that held Osiris within its embrace. The Egyptians told that Anubis, the jackal-headed god, came also, drawn by the devotion of Isis and Nephthys. He was the guardian of the dead, the protector of bodies, the one who knew the secrets of mummification. He knelt with them in the marshes, his presence calm, his hands skilled, his knowledge vast. Together they worked upon Osiris, not in haste, but in reverence. They bound him with linen, anointed him with oils, perfumed him with incense, wrapped him in the care that prepares the dead for eternal life. The first mummification, they said, was done here, in the quiet marshes, by the hands of Isis, Nephthys, and Anubis, their devotion shaping the ritual that would endure for all generations. But even in their care, Isis did not forget the danger. Seth was ever watchful, his hatred unending. She kept her work hidden, moving Osiris from place to place, guarding him with spells, wrapping the marshes in silence. Each day she watched the skies. Each night she listened for footsteps. Her devotion was steady, but it was also cautious, for love that endures must also protect. She became the guardian as well as the mourner, the one who shielded as well as the one who wept. The Egyptians lingered on the image of Isis in the marshes, for it was an image of quiet strength. They imagined her seated upon the ground, her hair falling loose, her hands folded upon her lap, her eyes steady upon the chest. They imagined her singing in the dusk, her voice soft as the wind, her presence calm as the reeds. They imagined her moving slowly in ritual, each gesture graceful, each word deliberate. To listen to her story was to rest in her presence, to feel the calm of her patience, to be carried by the rhythm of her devotion as she mourned and as she worked. Something else stirred within her heart. She longed not only to restore Osiris to life, but also to conceive a child by him, one who would carry his name forward, one who would avenge his death, one who would bring justice to Egypt. This longing shaped her rituals, guided her prayers, infused her magic. She whispered her desire into the night, asking the gods to bless her, asking Osiris to join with her even in death, asking love to bring forth new life. The stories told that through her magic, through her devotion, through her unyielding will, she conceived Horus, the falcon-headed god who would grow to avenge his father and restore the throne of Egypt. This moment was remembered not as a violent act, but as a quiet mystery, a union of love that transcended death, a gift born of devotion and patience. Horus's conception became a sign that love endures, that even when the body is broken, life continues, that grief itself can become the soil from which hope is born. Isis guarded her secret closely. She knew that Seth would seek to destroy any child of Osiris, that he would not rest if he knew of Horus. She hid her pregnancy, keeping it within the veil of her solitude, carrying her child with the same patience with which she had carried her search. The marshes became her refuge, the reeds her walls, the waters her guardians. She lived there in silence, her devotion shaping each day, her hope shaping each night. Listeners of the story would rest here in the calm of the marshes, in the slow unfolding of Isis's morning. They would imagine her movements, steady and soft, her voice rising in laments, her hands weaving rituals, her presence filling the reeds with quiet strength. The pace of the tale was not hurried, for grief is not hurried, devotion is not hurried. Each word was a step, each breath a moment, each silence a resting place. And so Isis remained in the marshes, hidden yet enduring, mourning yet hoping, guarding yet loving. Osiris lay within the chest, silent, wrapped in linen, anointed with oils, perfumed with incense. He was not restored to full life, but he was preserved, held within the care of love, protected from the hatred of Seth, carried forward into the mystery of rebirth. The Egyptians believed that this care, this ritual, this devotion was what made Osiris the king of the dead, the ruler of the underworld. For though his body did not walk again upon the earth, his presence lived on in the afterlife, guiding the souls of the departed, offering them judgment and justice. Isis's work had given him this role. Her love had given him this throne. Her patience had given him this eternity. But for Isis, the story was not finished. She had found Osiris. She had preserved him. She had conceived Horus. But Seth still walked the land, still held power, still sought to undo her work. Her patience would be tested again, her devotion challenged again, her strength called upon again. Yet she did not falter. She remained steady, calm, enduring. She knew that love does not end in a single act, but continues through every trial, through every sorrow, through every silence. The marshes grew quiet in her presence. The reeds swayed gently. The birds called softly. The waters moved slowly. It was as though the whole land rested with her, as though nature itself shared in her mourning, as though the earth itself carried her devotion. Her story became not only a tale of gods, but a tale of the land, a reflection of the rhythms of Egypt, of the Nile, of the people who mourned their dead and loved their living. And so, in the quiet marshes, Isis's devotion continued. She guarded Osiris, mourned for him, worked her rituals, whispered her prayers, conceived her child, and waited for what would come. Her patience was endless, her love unbroken, her presence eternal. For those who listened, the story became a lullaby, carrying them into rest, soothing them with the rhythm of grief and love, cradling them in the arms of Isis's devotion. The night passed slowly, the stars turned overhead, the waters whispered against the reeds. Isis sat beside the chest, her eyes steady, her voice soft, her hands folded in patience. The story lingered with her there, resting in her mourning, resting in her love, resting in the endless calm of devotion that endures even in the shadow of loss. The marshes where Isis hid Osiris were quiet. Each night, Isis, she believed that what she guarded in silence would remain hidden, safe from the gaze of Seth. Yet hatred is restless, and cruelty has sharp eyes. Seth wandered Egypt with his fury still burning, unwilling to believe that Isis had given up her grief, unwilling to trust that Osiris was lost forever. His heart was twisted, his mind full of suspicion. And so, one day, his searching eyes found the marshes. It is told that Seth discovered the chest by chance, though in myths there is little that is chance. Some said his own restlessness led him into the marshes, where fate guided his steps. However it was, the moment came when Seth's gaze fell upon the chest, and his hatred flared again like fire in dry grass. He did not weep, did not pause, did not feel sorrow for what he saw. Instead, his anger deepened. Osiris had not been gone enough. Isis had not been broken enough. The chest was still whole, the body still preserved. Seth's cruelty could not allow this. He seized the chest, dragged it from the reeds, and opened. He hacked Osiris's body into pieces, scattering them into many parts, so that Isis could not bring him together again. Some said he tore him into 14 pieces, some said 16, some said 42, one for each district of Egypt. Each piece he cast away, into the waters, into the sands, into the fields, into the mountains. He scattered them so that no single place would hold him, so that Isis's mourning would have no rest. His cruelty was not only destruction, but scattering, not only death, but division. When Isis returned and found the chest broken, the body gone, her sorrow rose again like the tide. She did not cry out in rage, for her voice was steady even in grief, but she wept long and deep, her tears falling into the reeds, her heart heavy as stone. The work she had done, the care she had given, the love she had wrapped around Osirisal had been torn apart by Seth's cruelty. Yet even in this sorrow, she did not yield. Her devotion was stronger than hatred, her patience stronger than cruelty. She would not abandon Osiris, even broken, even scattered. So she began again. Her wandering, which had carried her along the Nile and across the sea, began once more. Now her path was scattered across Egypt itself. She traveled to the north and to the south, to the fields and to the deserts, to the mountains and to the waters. In each place she searched, asking, praying, calling, seeking the pieces of her beloved. Each time she found a piece of Osiris, she lifted it with her hands, washed it with water, anointed it with oil, wrapped it in linen, and laid it to rest in reverence. She sang her laments as she worked, her voice soft but steady, her words carrying both grief and love. Each piece became a shrine, each shrine a place of devotion, each place a mark upon the land where love had passed. The Egyptians believed that many of their sacred sites were born from this search, each temple a memory of where Isis found a part of Osiris, each ritual a reflection of her patience. The land itself seemed to guide her, Fishermen told her when their nets had caught something strange. Farmers led her to places where their plows had struck bones. Shepherds spoke of fragments found among the rocks. The people of Egypt became part of her search, not in grandeur, not in procession, but in quiet acts of witness. They gave her what they found, moved by her sorrow, honored by her presence. She thanked them with blessings, with gentle words, with the comfort of her gaze. In this way, her search was not only a quest of love, but also a bond with the people. Her devotion shared, her mourning shared, her patience shared. The Egyptians lingered on the image of her wandering, for it was slow, endless, rhythmic. Each step was a prayer, each discovery a pause, each ritual a moment of reverence. The story moved like her footsteps, calm, steady, without haste. To listen was to follow her along the fields, across the sands, through the reeds, over the hills, to rest beside her as she lifted each fragment, to breathe with her as she sang her laments. Some said that one piece was never found, the phallus of Osiris, lost in the waters, devoured by fish. Yet Isis did not despair. She shaped one from her magic, a symbol of what had been lost, a reminder that love endures, even in absence. What was broken could be mended, what was scattered could be gathered, what was lost could be remembered, what was missing could be renewed through devotion. Piece by piece, shrine by shrine, ritual by ritual, Isis brought Osiris together again. She did not restore him to life as he had been walking upon the earth as a king, but she restored him to wholeness in death, preparing him for his role in the underworld. Her care gave him dignity, her love gave him eternity, her patience gave him power. The Egyptians believed that through her work, Osiris became the ruler of the dead, the judge of souls, the eternal king who sat upon the throne of the afterlife. Yet Isis herself remained upon the earth, her task not yet finished. For though Osiris was preserved, though he was honored, though he was given his throne in the underworld, Seth still lived, still held power, still walked upon the earth with his cruelty. Isis's devotion would turn now to her son, Horus, the child she carried, the heir of Osiris, the one who would one day challenge Seth and restore justice to Egypt. Her patience had carried her through grief. Her love had carried her through loss. Her endurance had carried her through searching. Now her hope would carry her into the future, into the raising of Horus, into the struggle yet to come. But for the listener, the story lingered still with Isis in her wandering. It lingered with her slow steps across the land, her hands lifting each fragment, her voice singing laments into the air. It lingered with the image of shrines across Egypt, each one a place of love, each one a place of memory, each one a place of patience. The Nile flowed on, the fields ripened in their time, the winds passed across the desert, and Isis walked still, her story unfolding in steps, her devotion shaping the land, her love shaping eternity. Piece by piece, she gathered Osiris, and piece by piece, she gave the world the assurance that love endures, that devotion does not end. All who searched could hear their own steps in her journey. All who loved could hear their own devotion in her laments. Isis's patience became their rest. Her calm became their comfort. Her endurance became their lullaby. And so the story rested here, with Isis wandering still, gathering, mourning, loving, her presence eternal in the reeds, her voice eternal in the winds, her devotion eternal in the land of Egypt. The marshes had grown quiet after Isis's long search for the scattered pieces of Osiris. The winds stirred the reeds softly, the waters whispered in gentle currents, the stars turned slowly above, as though marking the passing of time itself. Isis knelt beside the chest where Osiris lay, restored now in form, wrapped in linen, anointed with oils, her magic woven into every fold, every layer, every touch. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but with reverence, for she knew the depth of her work, the patience it had required, the love it had demanded. In the stillness, she rested beside him for a time, allowing herself a quiet moment, breathing. In the calm of completion, allowing the reeds, the waters, and the night to cradle her sorrow and her devotion alike. Yet the story of Isis did not end here, for her devotion carried her further, and her love found a new focus in the child growing within her. Horus, the heir of Osiris, stirred in her womb, and she felt the presence of life as surely as she had felt the flow of the Nile or the weight of the chest she had carried. Each movement within her, each flutter, each heartbeat became part of the rhythm of her patience, a gentle reminder that life continues even after devastation, even after cruelty, even after loss. She whispered to the child soft words of love, of hope, of courage. She sang lullabies even before he drew his first breath, weaving her magic into the very fibers of his being, guiding him with her devotion, shaping his spirit with her own. Isis's care extended beyond the marshes. She moved with caution, for Seth was still at large, still vengeful, still unyielding. The Egyptians believed that the world itself seemed to hold its breath as Isis prepared her child, hiding him in secret places, moving him from one sanctuary to another, guarding him with spells, disguising him with magic, teaching him strength and patience even before he could speak. The reeds and the waters, the hills and the forests became allies in her work, a natural protection against those who would do harm. She spoke softly to Horus, telling him of courage, telling him of justice, telling him of love that endures, beyond fear, beyond death, beyond cruelty. In these hidden places, she taught him the ways of the gods and of men alike. She instructed him in the careful observation of the land, in the subtle reading of the skies, in the patient listening to the whispers of the wind. She guided his hands to understand the rhythms of the world, the patterns in the reeds, the currents of the waters, the habits of creatures that moved unseen. She taught him the ways of survival, not with harshness or cruelty, but with a steady hand and a quiet voice, so that he might grow strong, aware, wise, and patient. Her magic continued in every gesture, every breath, every word she whispered. To the skies, to cloak him from enemies, to the waters, to carry him safely, to the reeds, to bend and hide him from sight. She spoke the secret names of the winds, calling them as protectors, and the names of animals, calling them as guides. In this way, Horus grew under the careful watch of Isis, surrounded by the quiet guardianship of nature, nurtured not only by his mother's flesh, but by her magic, by her patience, by her devotion. Even as Horus grew, Isis never forgot the lesson of Osiris, the pain of loss, the cruelty of Seth. She told him stories of his father, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with reverent sorrow. She described the days when Osiris had walked among the living, ruling the fields, blessing the people, moving with calm authority. She told him of the chest, the river, the sea, the distant land of Byblos, and of her patient search. She told him of the fragments scattered across Egypt, and of how love, devotion, and patience had brought them together again. Each story became a lesson in endurance, in justice, in courage, and in quiet, unyielding devotion. The Egyptians imagined her walking with the child through the reeds and the marshes, her hands clasped gently around his, guiding him with slow, careful steps. The stars, reflected in the waters, mirrored in their eyes, and the night seemed to pause in reverence, as though it too understood the care she bestowed. She taught him to be patient, to be observant, to respect the land and its creatures, to listen before acting, to endure before responding. She taught him not through commands, but through example, and he absorbed it all quietly, with the same calm that had always surrounded Isis herself. And yet, even in her careful teaching, the shadow of Seth loomed. He did not rest, he did not cease. He wandered Egypt, his cruelty unending, his gaze searching for signs of Osiris, signs of Horus, signs of Isis's devotion. But Isis had learned the art of hiding, the patience of movement, the subtle weaving of magic into life itself. She placed protective spells, drew secret symbols in the sand and water, whispered the hidden names of power into the wind. Every step she took was calculated to shield her child. Every breath a quiet spell, every touch a blessing. Horus grew strong under her care, his spirit shaped by love, his mind shaped by patience, his body shaped by the gentle discipline of survival. He learned to move silently, to observe without being seen, to understand the patterns of nature and of human behavior. He learned the names of creatures, the flow of waters, the currents of the winds. Isis taught him not only the magic of the gods, but the wisdom of observation, so that he might grow not only powerful, but perceptive, not only capable, but wise. Each day became a lesson, each moment a ritual, each breath a guide. As the years passed, the Egyptians said that Horus became ready. His strength was tempered with patience, his courage tempered with wisdom, his purpose clear in the knowledge of who he was and what he must do. Isis, too, was ready. Her grief had turned into enduring devotion. Her sorrow had turned into quiet strength. Her patience had turned into guidance. The time had come for Horus to face the world beyond the marshes, to confront the cruelty that had shaped his life, to restore justice to Egypt. Yet she did not rush him, did not push him forward. She walked with him to the edge of the waters, to the fields where the Nile spread wide, to the hills that marked the horizon, teaching him one final lesson in patience, one final lesson in observation, one final lesson in love that endures. She reminded him of his father, Osiris, not with anger, but with reverence. She reminded him of Seth, not with hatred, but with vigilance. She reminded him of the world he would inherit, the justice he must uphold, the love he must protect. When the moment came for Horus to leave the hidden marshes, he did so with calm determination. Isis stood beside him, her hands resting on his shoulders, her eyes steady, her voice soft. She whispered blessings into his ears, reminders of patience, guidance for courage, words of protection. And though he would face Seth, though he would face danger and trials, he carried with him the lessons of his mother, the magic of her devotion, the patient endurance of her love. The Egyptians lingered on this final image, for it was one of quiet power. Isis, serene and calm, standing in the marshes with her child, the waters flowing around them, the reeds bending gently in the wind, the night sky turning slowly above, filled with stars. It was a picture of devotion, of love, of patience, of endurance. It was a story that moved slowly, deliberately, softly, a story that could lull the listener into calm reflection, a story that reminded them of the strength found in devotion, the comfort found in love, the quiet power of patience. Even as Horus left the marshes to fulfill his destiny, Isis remained in the quiet, her presence still weaving through the reeds, still flowing with the waters, still resting in the calm of the night. Her work was not complete, for love and devotion are never complete. But she had fulfilled her greatest task, restoring Osiris, nurturing Horus, preparing the world for justice, and shaping the future with her patience and care. The stars turned. Overhead, the Nile continued its endless flow, and Isis walked quietly among the reeds, her voice soft, her heart steady, her presence eternal. The Egyptians believed that her devotion echoed through the land, through the waters, through the winds, and through every heart that understood love, loss, and the patience to endure both. Her story became a lullaby, a song of calm strength, a tale of endurance, a reflection of love that transcends grief, hate, and time itself. And so, in the quiet marshes, with the reeds swaying softly, the waters moving gently, and the stars turning slowly above, Isis remained a figure of devotion, a guide of love, a teacher of patience, a mother of courage, her story carrying on in every whisper of wind, in every ripple of water, in every shadow cast by the night. The marshes had grown familiar, a soft rhythm of reeds, waters, and winds that shaped the life of Horus under the patient gaze of Isis. The child had grown, no longer a mere infant cradled in the quiet arms of his mother, but a boy of steady steps, sharp eyes, and attentive mind. Each day, Isis guided him through the world around him with a gentle hand, allowing him to see the movements of creatures, the patterns of water, the subtle currents of the wind. Her lessons were not rushed, for wisdom cannot be hurried, and patience is learned best through quiet repetition, the slow observation of the world in all its small details. She began with the marshes themselves, teaching him to move silently among the reeds. Each step required attention, each breath measured, each glance calculated. She would walk ahead of him, and he would follow, imitating her calm and careful motions. Sometimes she would stop and point to a bird perched atop a reed, a heron with feathers white as the clouds, and ask him to watch its movements. "Notice the stillness before it strikes," she whispered. "Notice the patience. Life is never rushed. Observe first, act later." Horus would nod, his small hands pressed together, his eyes wide and still, absorbing each lesson with the intensity of youth tempered by the serenity of Isis's example. As he grew older, Isis taught him to recognize the flow of the waters. She led him along the edges of the Nile, showing him the currents, the way one wave followed another, the soft pull of the river beneath its gentle surface. She explained that just as water moves with both power and patience, so too must one's actions. Strength without patience is wasted, she told him. Courage without thought is danger. You must learn to bend, to wait, to understand the world before you shape it. Horus would run his small hands through the shallow waters, feeling their temperature, their force, their subtle shifts. The lessons were not merely physical, but also spiritual, guiding him to understand the rhythm of life itself, even as Isis guided him through the natural world. She also spoke to him of the past of his father, Osiris, of the cruelty of Seth, and of the lessons to be learned from both. She did not speak in anger or bitterness, but in calm clarity, telling him of what had been lost, what had been restored, and what must one day be reclaimed. Seth is cunning, she said. He does not act in haste, but he moves like a shadow, unseen, waiting for weakness. You must know him, not with fear, but with patience. You must know yourself, not with pride, but with wisdom. These lessons she wove, slowly, gently, into the fabric of his understanding, allowing him to grow, not only strong, but also thoughtful, not only brave, but also careful. Horus learned quickly, for he had inherited not only the blood of Osiris, but also the devotion of Isis. His eyes grew sharp, noticing the smallest details, a ripple in the water, a shadow among the reeds, a sound too faint for ordinary hearing. He learned the names of the creatures, the habits of birds, the patterns of fish beneath the waters. Isis taught him to respect all life, not only as a reflection of divine order, but also as part of his own preparation. Every creature could teach him something. Every pattern in nature could prepare him for what was to come. The Egyptians who told these stories imagined Isis walking beside Horus along quiet banks, her robes brushing the reeds, her voice soft as the wind. She guided him through fields where grain swayed in the sun, across hills where shadows stretched long, along streams that glittered with sunlight. In every moment, she taught him the value of observation, of stillness, of patience. He was learning not merely to survive, but to thrive in awareness, to grow in knowledge as well as strength, to prepare his mind as carefully as his body. Yet, Isis also introduced him to the dangers that had shaped their lives. She spoke of Seth not as a monster to be feared, but as a force to understand, a shadow in the world that could be countered with wisdom. Do not rush to strike, she said. Do not act from anger. Watch, wait, and then act with precision. You will need this when the time comes. She taught him the subtle arts of concealment, the quiet gestures that allowed one to move unseen, the spells of protection woven into the air, the secret names whispered to the wind. Horus learned that vigilance was not fear, but preparation, that patience was not weakness, but strength. Days passed slowly in the marshes. Horus learned to hunt small creatures, not for cruelty, but for sustenance and understanding, to follow tracks in the mud and reeds, to read the signs left by the wind and the water. Isis guided him gently, correcting him with calm words, praising him with soft encouragement. Her magic remained subtly present, not overwhelming, not dominating, but shaping his world, providing protection, allowing him to grow with careful guidance. At night, Isis would sit with him beneath the stars, her hands folded in patience, her voice whispering soft prayers for protection and wisdom. She told him of the constellations, of the rhythms, of the seasons, of the cycles of life and death. Horus would listen quietly, absorbing the stories not only with his mind, but with his spirit. He began to understand that life was measured in patience, that courage was tempered in quiet reflection, that strength was best guided by knowledge. Even in play, Isis guided him. She allowed him to test his strength, to run and leap, to discover his own limits, yet always with careful oversight. She created gentle contests among the reeds, soft games of agility and strategy, designed to teach him focus, endurance, and self-control. Every small action became part of a larger lesson, every game a preparation for the day when he would face Seth, when the lessons of patience and observation would become essential tools for survival and justice. The Egyptians told how, in these years, Isis imbued Horus not only with physical skill but with moral understanding. She guided him to discern right from wrong, to understand the consequences of action, to balance courage with wisdom. She taught him empathy, instructing him to see the world through the eyes of others, to anticipate the movements of those around him, to act not with pride but with care. In this, she shaped not only a warrior but a king, one who would lead with patience and justice, as Osiris would have wished. Time flowed slowly, and Horus grew steadily under her care. His body strengthened, his mind sharpened, his spirit deepened. Yet Isis never allowed him to grow arrogant, never allowed him to forget his dependence on patience, never allowed him to act without reflection. Strength without patience will falter, she reminded him often. Wisdom without action is incomplete. You must carry both. Horus carried these lessons within him, moving through the marshes with quiet awareness, listening to the reeds, feeling the currents, noting the birds, learning the world as a child learns, not only by seeing, but by absorbing every subtle rhythm. And so the years passed in quiet repetition, slow and steady, each day building upon the last. Isis remained beside him, a constant presence, her magic subtly guiding, her love shaping, her devotion enduring. She allowed him to experience the world fully, yet within the circle of her protection. She prepared him not with force, not with fury, but with patience, teaching him the art of endurance, the discipline of observation, the quiet strength of calm and careful action. Even as the world moved beyond the marshes, even as the lands of Egypt called with their wide horizons, Isis's lessons continued. Horus began to recognize the presence of Seth in the world, not as an immediate threat, but as a shadow, a force that must be understood before it could be confronted. He learned to anticipate danger, to read the intentions of those around him, to measure the consequences of action before striking. Each lesson was slow, deliberate, embedded in daily life, in gentle walks, in careful observation, in whispered stories under the stars. By the time Horus was ready to leave the marshes for his eventual confrontation, he had grown not only in strength but in wisdom, not only in courage but in patience, not only in power but in understanding. Isis had guided him through every step, shaping his body, mind, and spirit with quiet devotion. The child who had once been cradled in her arms now stood ready. The lessons of marsh, river, and red embedded in him, the presence of his father, Osiris, honored in his heart, the memory of Seth's cruelty guiding his vigilance. And so the story paused here in the quiet marshes, with Isis and Horus standing beneath the stars. The winds whispered, the reeds bent, the waters flowed gently, and the night seemed to hold its breath in reverence. Isis's lessons had been slow, deliberate, patient, each one a foundation for the days to come. Horus had learned not only the strength of the warrior, but the patience of the guardian, not only the courage of the sun, but the wisdom of the air. For the listener, the tale was gentle, immersive, and calm. It invited one to follow every slow step, every measured breath, every whisper of instruction. It carried them into the world of Isis and Horus with soft rhythm, into the quiet of devotion and learning, into the enduring presence of love, patience, and wisdom. The marshes remained still as Isis and Horus moved among the reeds, the stars turning overhead, the waters murmuring softly. And though the time of confrontation with Seth had not yet arrived, the foundations were laid, the lessons absorbed, the child prepared. Isis's calm presence, her careful teaching, her quiet devotion became a lullaby in motion, a steady rhythm that carried the story forward, guiding both Horus and the listener toward the unfolding destiny that awaited beyond the horizon. The marshes had grown quieter still, though the winds carried a subtle tension that seemed to whisper through the reeds. Horus moved among them now with more confidence, his steps steady, his eyes attentive, his mind alert, yet always calm under the guidance of Isis. She walked beside him, her presence both protective and instructive, a constant companion whose patience and devotion shaped every action, every thought, every breath. The child who had once been guided only through observation was now learning to act, yet always with caution, always with the awareness of consequences, always with the quiet discipline that Isis had instilled in him from his earliest days. The first encounters with Seth were not marked by grand displays of violence or immediate danger. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of leaves signaling a predator nearby. Horus would notice shadows that moved differently, hear sounds carried faintly on the wind, sense tension in the air before anything had fully taken shape. Isis had taught him these lessons well, to observe before acting, to measure before responding, to trust his instincts, yet temper them with careful thought. Patience, she whispered one morning as they walked along the riverbank, is as important in confrontation as it is in mourning. Never rush into the shadow. Wait, watch, understand, and then act. The Egyptians believed that Seth was everywhere, his influence spreading invisibly, touching the lands in ways that could not always be seen. And indeed, Horus felt it, the subtle unease in the fields, the whisper of cruelty in the winds, the shifting of animals that sensed danger before humans could. Isis guided him to recognize these signs without fear, to understand them as part of the rhythm of life and the pattern of the world. Seth teaches lessons too, she explained, not by love, but by challenge. Learn from his presence, learn from his moves, and you will grow stronger than he expects. Horus began to practice the skills that Isis had instilled over the years, now applied to a new purpose. He learned to move swiftly, yet quietly, blending into the reeds, reading the currents of the river to anticipate movement, noticing the tiniest shifts in shadows. He learned to strike only when necessary, to act decisively, yet without anger, to preserve his energy and his focus for the moments that truly mattered. Each day, he tested himself against nature itself, the flight of birds, the currents of water, the behavior of the smallest creatures, and Isis observed, correcting gently, guiding subtly, allowing him to refine his instincts, even as Horus practiced. Isis continued her quiet magic. She whispered protective words to the winds, shaped barriers of invisibility in the reeds, guided the water to conceal tracks, and called upon the creatures of the marsh to aid in warning or defense. Yet she allowed Horus to move within this protection, never removing the lessons from his own responsibility. He learned not only to trust his mother's guidance, but also to trust himself, to measure his abilities, to refine his perception, to prepare for a confrontation that would demand everything he had learned. One morning, as the sun rose and the mist lifted from the river, Horus noticed a disturbance in the reeds. A shadow moved differently, heavier, more deliberate, more cruel. He froze, remembering Isis's teachings. He did not shout, he did not run, he did not act rashly. He watched, measured, and felt the tension in the air. Isis stood behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders, her eyes calm yet vigilant. "He is near," she whispered. "Do not act until you understand. Let the shadow reveal itself fully before you respond." Seth's presence was fleeting at first, subtle traces in the movements of the wind, in the behavior of the creatures, in the shifting of light. Horus learned to follow these traces, to anticipate the paths that Seth might take, to understand the strategies of a foe who preferred cunning to brute force. Isis guided him with quiet words, reminders of patience, encouragement to observe, and soft instruction on subtle magic that could protect without revealing itself. She taught him that knowledge of the enemy was as valuable as strength, that patience could be a shield, and that awareness could be a sword. As days passed, Horus encountered Seth more directly. These encounters were brief, almost like glimpses of a shadow in the distance, tests of vigilance, exercises in restraint. Horus learned to respond without fear, to act without haste, to rely upon the instincts cultivated over years under Isis' guidance. Each confrontation taught him something new: the weight of presence, the subtlety of movement, the importance of timing, the value of calm in the midst of tension. Isis observed closely, sometimes guiding him with whispered advice, sometimes allowing him to make his own choices, always shaping his understanding with quiet patience. Even as these lessons unfolded, Isis continued to reinforce the moral and spiritual framework that would define Horus as a just ruler and a disciplined warrior. She taught him to balance strength with compassion, to temper courage with foresight, to combine power with patience. She spoke often of Osiris, not in bitterness over his death, but in reverence for his wisdom and justice. She spoke of Seth, not with hatred, but with clarity about the danger he represented and the lessons his presence could teach. These teachings shaped Horus's character, forming a foundation of understanding that would guide his actions in the trials to come. The Egyptians imagined the scenes in the marshes with meticulous detail. Isis walking with Horus through the reeds, the morning sun reflecting in the waters, the soft murmur of wind and bird, the subtle shifts of light and shadow. Horus's movements were careful, his attention complete, his body and mind aligned in harmony with the world. Isis's magic remained quiet, woven seamlessly into the natural rhythms of the marsh, offering protection without intrusion, guidance without compulsion, shaping not only the boy's actions, but also the listener's perception of calm, focus, and enduring patience. Sometimes Seth's influence was more direct. A sudden storm might sweep across the marshes, a strong gust bending the reeds and rippling the water. A predator, moved by unseen influence, might approach, testing Horus's ability to act with caution and precision. Each challenge was designed not to terrify, but to teach. Isis guided him through these moments with steady hands, calm words, and soft encouragement. She allowed him to confront the fear within, to measure his own readiness, and to respond with discipline rather than rasage. Through these careful, deliberate encounters, Horus began to understand not only the external danger of Seth, but also the internal discipline required to face it. He learned that strength alone was insufficient, that courage without awareness could be folly, that patience was as powerful as any weapon. Isis's teachings became embedded in every gesture, every thought, every breath. Her devotion shaped the very air around him, the flow of water beneath his feet, the whisper of wind through the reeds, creating an environment where he could grow both physically and spiritually, even as the lessons continued. Isis reminded him of the ultimate goal: to restore justice, to reclaim what had been lost, to honor the memory of Osiris, and to protect the future of Egypt. She spoke of strategy, not with urgency, but with clarity of consequence, not with fear, but with understanding, of responsibility, not with burden, but with reverence. Horus absorbed these lessons quietly, internalizing not only the tactics of confrontation, but the ethics of leadership, the discipline of patience, and the power of calm reflection. The marshes themselves seemed to resonate with this learning. Each ripple in the water, each sway of the reeds, each distant bird call became part of the rhythm of preparation. Horus moved with attention, guided by Isis's steady hand, attuned to the smallest signals in the environment. He learned to predict the behavior of both nature and foe, to anticipate challenges, to measure responses, to balance action with observation. Every day became a training of the senses, the mind, and the spirit, preparing him for the trials that would eventually bring him into direct confrontation with Seth at night. Isis and Horus would sit beneath the stars, the soft murmur of water, and wind creating a lullaby of patience and calm. Isis would recount stories of Osiris and Seth, of the marshes, of the journey that had brought them here. Each story a lesson in endurance, vigilance, and careful preparation. Horus would listen, absorbing not only the words, but the rhythm, the tone, the quiet strength that infused every gesture of his mother. These moments became sacred, forming a slow, deliberate foundation for the courage and wisdom he would need in the battles to come. And so the story lingered here, in the quiet marshes, with Isis guiding Horus through observation, patience, and early confrontation with Seth. The winds whispered, the waters flowed gently, the reeds swayed, and the night sky turned slowly above. Horus learned the rhythm of vigilance, the discipline of patience, the balance of courage and wisdom. Isis's calm presence, her careful instruction, her unwavering devotion shaped not only the boy, but also the listener, guiding them into quiet, reflection, soft focus, and the enduring sense that preparation, patience, and steady learning are as powerful as any act of strength. The marshes had grown dense with reeds and mist, a quiet labyrinth of water and shadow, perfectly suited for the careful training of a child who would one day confront a god. Horus moved among them now with more precision than ever before, guided by Isis's calm presence, her patient eyes following every step, her quiet words shaping each thought and breath. The child who had once wandered among the reeds with curiosity now walked with purpose, aware of the smallest shift in wind, the faintest ripple in the water, the slightest shadow across the mud. His senses were tuned by years of slow instruction. His patience deepened, his understanding of the world around him broadening with every careful movement. Isis had begun to prepare him for the first serious confrontation with Seth. The boy had learned the rhythms of nature, the currents of water, the sway of the reeds, the patterns of animals. But now he needed to understand the movements of a foe who would not always appear directly. "Seth is clever," Isis whispered one morning, as the sun rose pale and gold over the river. "He does not strike openly. He tests, he deceives, he waits for weakness. You must learn to see him in the unseen, to sense him in absence, to measure him in shadow. Only then can you meet him with readiness." Horus nodded, his small hands brushing the reeds as he walked, his eyes sharp yet calm, absorbing every lesson with the quiet focus that Isis had nurtured for so long. The first encounters were subtle, like ripples that hint at an approaching storm. A sudden bend in the reeds, a flash of movement in the water, a sound carried too faintly on the windall were signs that Horus had to interpret. He remembered Isis's instructions: do not act hastily, observe, understand, anticipate. He crouched in the reeds, listening, feeling the vibrations of the earth, the whispers of water, the soft calls of birds disturbed by some unseen presence. He had learned to trust his instincts, yet temper them with careful thought to respond. Only when the full pattern revealed itself, Seth's presence was like the slow turning of a shadow, subtle but heavy, an invisible weight in the air. He tested Horus in ways that were not always visible, sending disturbances into the marsh's predators moved by unseen influence. Sudden gusts of wind, water currents shifted in strange ways. Horus had to read these signals as carefully as a reader of stars, interpreting each moment, predicting the path of danger, and preparing his response. Isis observed quietly from a distance, her eyes calm, her breath steady, her guidance unspoken yet entirely present. The first test came in the form of a sudden predator, a large feline moving silently through the reeds, unseen until it was almost upon Horus. He froze, recalling the lessons of patience and observation, and moved not with panic, but with quiet precision. The cat's movements were swift, yet Horus anticipated them, shifting subtly, avoiding the path of attack, and waiting for the predator to pass. Isis's soft voice came through the reeds like a lullaby. Patience, observation, timing. Never act before the moment is ready. The cat vanished, leaving only the soft ripple of water and the bending of reeds, and Horus breathed steadily, his awareness sharpened by the trial. Days passed in similar tests, each one carefully orchestrated by the subtle hand of fate, or perhaps by the distant influence of Seth. Horus learned to detect patterns, to anticipate actions, to balance courage with caution. Isis guided him in subtle magic, teaching him to shape the currents of wind and water, to conceal his movements, to weave protective spells into the reeds, to call upon the creatures of the marsh for subtle warning. Yet she allowed him to act, independently, trusting his instincts, refining his judgment, and strengthening his sense of responsibility. As the boy's skill grew, Isis introduced him to more deliberate challenges. She spoke of Seth's cunning, describing not brute force, but strategy, patience, deception, and shadowed influence. Strength is not enough, she explained. Courage alone will fail. You must anticipate, observe, and respond. You must know the mind of your enemy, even when he hides it. Horus practiced these lessons, moving with the quiet focus of a hawk in the reeds, observing the smallest signs, predicting outcomes, refining his responses. The lessons became a rhythm, a meditation, a deliberate shaping of both body and mind, preparing him for the inevitable confrontations to come. One day, as the sun began to sink behind distant hills, Horus sensed a subtle change in the marsh. The water's current shifted slightly. The reeds bent differently. A bird cried softly in alarm. He froze, eyes scanning the environment, muscles tensed in readiness. Isis's calm hand touched his shoulder. "He approaches," she whispered. "Observe first, then act. Do not let fear guide you. Let clarity guide you." Horus nodded, breathing slowly, tuning himself to the environment, aware of the subtle signals that only patience and practice could reveal. Seth's appearance that evening was brief, yet instructive. The god moved like a shadow through the reeds, testing Horus's patience and observation. The boy did not charge, did not shout, did not strike. Instead, he moved with careful steps, watching the patterns of Seth's movements, noticing the disruptions in nature, anticipating the trajectory of shadow and sound. Isis's soft guidance remained constant, a calm presence shaping his focus, reinforcing lessons learned over years, embedding understanding with quiet repetition. The Egyptians believed that these early encounters shaped Horus not only in skill, but in character. He learned that power without patience is wasted. Courage without observation is dangerous. Strength without wisdom is incomplete. Each moment in the marsh became a deliberate exercise, each encounter a meditation, each response a reflection of both instinct and deliberate thought. Horus's body and mind were trained simultaneously in harmony, guided by Isis's patient devotion. Horus began to experiment with strategy, using his environment to his advantage. He observed the patterns of water and wind, noticing the subtle shifts that marked the approach of danger. He moved silently through the reeds, leaving minimal trace, learning to anticipate both the natural and unnatural. Isis encouraged this development, correcting gently, praising subtly, allowing him to refine techniques, deepen understanding, and cultivate the patience that would serve him in the ultimate struggle with Seth. Even in moments of play, Isis incorporated lessons. She would challenge him with tasks requiring observation, careful movement, and precise timing. These games were quiet, measured, deliberate, designed not to induce fear but to cultivate awareness. Horus learned to predict patterns, anticipate challenges, and respond with calm precision. Each exercise became a small preparation for the larger challenges of confronting Seth, for understanding the movements of a cunning adversary, and for responding with both courage and wisdom. Nighttime brought reflection. Isis and Horus would sit beneath the stars, the reeds swaying gently, the river flowing softly, the wind carrying quiet whispers. She would recount stories of Osiris and Seth, of the trials faced in the past, of the virtues required to overcome challenges. Horus listened attentively, absorbing not only the lessons, but the calm rhythm, the quiet strength, the deliberate pacing. The marsh became a place of both training and meditation, where action and stillness coexisted, where vigilance and patience were cultivated together, and where the boy's understanding of courage, wisdom, and justice deepened steadily. Over time, Horace's confidence grew. He moved through the marshes with deliberate care, responding to disturbances with calm precision, anticipating challenges with keen observation, and applying lessons learned over years of patient instruction. Isis observed constantly, guiding subtly, shaping both his abilities and his character, ensuring that courage was tempered by patience, that power was guided by understanding, and that readiness was balanced by reflection. Each encounter with Seth, whether subtle or direct, reinforced the lessons Isis had instilled. Horace learned to sense danger before it arrived, to act with careful deliberation, to measure the impact of his actions, and to maintain calm even under pressure. He absorbed the rhythms of nature, the patterns of creatures, the subtle cues of the environment, all combined with lessons of morality, strategy, and patience imparted by Isis. By the time the marshes yielded to the wider lands of Egypt, Horace was not only a boy trained in skill and observation, but a young heir imbued with wisdom, patience, and a deep understanding of the delicate balance between action and reflection. And so, the story lingered in the quiet marshes, with Isis guiding Horace through his first significant challenges, shaping him through careful instruction, subtle trials, and slow, deliberate experiences. The waters flowed gently, the reeds swayed, the wind whispered, and the night sky turned steadily above. Horace learned the rhythm of confrontation, the art of patience in the face of danger, the balance of courage and wisdom, and the subtle strategies required to meet a cunning and cruel adversary. Isis's calm presence, her unwavering devotion, and her meticulous guidance created not only a warrior, but also a thoughtful, patient, and prepared young leader, readying him for the moments when his skill, knowledge, and courage would be tested in ways no game or lesson could fully predict. The marshes stretched in quiet patterns of water and reeds, reflecting the gold and crimson of the rising sun. Horace moved deliberately through the soft mud, each step measured, each breath steady, each sense alert yet calm. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more patient under the careful tutelage of Isis, yet now he faced trials that could not be avoided. Seth, ever cunning, had begun to manifest more directly, testing the boy not with subtle signs alone, but with challenges that required action, perception, and courage. Isis walked beside him, her presence a steady reassurance, her hands occasionally brushing his shoulder, her voice soft yet firm. Patience first, strength second, she whispered, and wisdom guiding both. The first of these confrontations came as a disturbance in the marshes that Horace immediately sensed. A sudden rush of wind bent the reeds violently. A shadow passed across the water, and the calls of birds grew anxious. Horace froze, recalling years of preparation, remembering every lesson Isis had instilled. He crouched low, observing, measuring, anticipating, every instinct sharpened, every breath deliberate. Isis remained close, her calm presence a grounding force, her eyes soft yet vigilant, guiding him without interference. She had taught him to rely on his own perception, to act with clarity, to respond only when necessary. Seth emerged from the reeds like a dark ripple in the water, his movements deliberate and unpredictable. The god's form was imposing, yet Horus did not waver. He measured the shifts in the shadows, the subtle bending of the reeds, the rhythm of the water disturbed by each of Seth's steps. Isis whispered reminders. Watch the pattern, sense the intention, wait for the precise moment, Horus observed, and in that observation he began to act. Moving with the calm precision of a trained mind and body, the first strike of Seth was swift, a challenge that tested both physical and mental discipline. Horus responded not with blind force, but with careful timing, using the reeds and water as shields, anticipating the movements of his opponent. Isis's guidance remained subtle, woven into the air, the wind, the water, shaping protection without overt interference. Horus's own skill, honed over years of patient observation and practice, carried him through the initial encounter. He moved with deliberate focus, countering Seth's cunning with a balance of courage, patience, and strategy. In the aftermath of the first confrontation, Horus paused, observing the environment, reading the patterns, and reflecting on his actions. Isis knelt beside him, her eyes calm, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Do you see how the reeds and currents can guide you?" she asked softly. "Do you notice how patience and observation gave you the advantage? Remember this, always. The strength of the body is nothing without the strength of perception and wisdom." Horus nodded, absorbing the lesson, understanding that victory was never just about force, but about measured, deliberate action. The next encounters were more intricate, testing not only strength but adaptability. Seth did not strike directly every time. Instead, he created challenges that required Horus to think, to anticipate, to plan. The currents of the river shifted unexpectedly. The reeds bent in unusual patterns, and animals moved with heightened awareness. Horus had to adjust his movements, predict the disruptions, and respond with both caution and precision. Isis watched silently, allowing him to learn from experience, providing only subtle guidance when necessary. Her devotion and patience shaping the boy without overt interference. During these trials, Horus learned the delicate balance between action and observation. He discovered that timing was as critical as force, that patience could create openings stronger than any strike, and that understanding his environment was as valuable as understanding his opponent. Isis encouraged him to reflect after each encounter, to consider the outcomes, to identify the lessons hidden within each moment of tension. Through this reflection, Horus deepened his understanding of strategy, awareness, and the subtle interplay between courage and wisdom. As the days passed, Seth's tests grew more deliberate. The god appeared more frequently, moving through the marshes with both speed and deception, challenging Horus's ability to anticipate, respond, and adapt. Each encounter was a measure of endurance, observation, and mental clarity. Horus learned to predict movements, to use the natural environment to his advantage, and to conserve his energy for the critical moment of engagement. Isis's presence remained constant, a quiet reassurance and subtle guidance, reminding him that strength alone was insufficient and that wisdom must guide every action. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, casting long shadows across the marsh, Horus sensed a particularly direct challenge. Seth emerged not from shadows, but from the open, testing his courage and composure. Horus steadied himself, recalling years of careful preparation, observation, and patient instruction. He moved deliberately, using the environment as both shield and guide, responding to Seth's movements with a blend of speed, precision, and measured calculation. Isis's voice came softly, almost imperceptibly, guiding his attention to subtle shifts in the water, the reeds, and the wind. Each decision became a careful dance, an exercise in balance, timing, and anticipation. During this encounter, Horus began to recognize patterns in Seth's behavior, subtle rhythms of movement that repeated even amid apparent chaos. He realized that by observing these patterns and responding with deliberate action, he could gain control of the encounter without relying solely on strength. Isis had prepared him for this understanding over years of quiet instruction, weaving lessons into daily activities, observations of nature, and patient guidance. Now, in the heat of confrontation, the preparation bore fruit, allowing Horus to act decisively yet calmly, countering Seth's cunning with measured precision. Even as he faced these challenges, Horus learned that true strength required restraint. Every action had consequences, and each choice shaped not only the immediate outcome, but also the path ahead. Isis emphasized reflection, urging him to consider every movement, every response, every choice. Courage without patience is recklessness, she reminded him gently. Force without thought is wasted. Wisdom guides both, and observation strengthens the mind as much as the body. Horus internalized these lessons, integrating them seamlessly into his movements, responses, and decisions. The Egyptians imagined the scene as one of quiet intensity. Horus standing among the reeds, eyes focused, body poised, senses attuned to every ripple, every sound, every shadow. Seth moved like a ripple of darkness, testing, probing, challenging. Isis's presence was subtle yet profound, a constant reassurance, a quiet guidance, shaping Horus's understanding, patience, and skill. The marsh became a crucible for his growth, a controlled environment where courage, wisdom, observation, and strategy converged to prepare him for the ultimate confrontation. Over time, Horus's confidence and skill deepened. He learned to anticipate not only physical movements, but psychological tactics, recognizing deception, manipulation, and hidden intentions. He discovered that victories could be achieved without direct confrontation, that timing and strategy often outweighed brute force, and that careful observation and calm reflection were essential in every encounter. Isis continued to guide him gently, reinforcing the lessons of patience, awareness, and deliberate action, ensuring that every skill he acquired was grounded in wisdom as well as strength. At night, after the trials of the day, Horus and Isis would sit beside the river, the reeds swaying gently, the water reflecting the stars above. Isis recounted stories of Osiris, of previous challenges, of victories achieved not by force alone, but by patience, strategy, and moral clarity. Horus listened intently, absorbing not only the words, but the rhythm, the tone, and the calm strength that infused each story. These moments of reflection reinforced the lessons of the day, deepening his understanding of courage, justice, and the careful balance between action and observation. Even in the quiet of these nights, the presence of Seth lingered, a shadow in the background, a subtle reminder of the ongoing challenge. Horus learned that vigilance must be constant, that readiness requires both patience and awareness, that courage must be guided by wisdom. Isis's teachings shaped not only his physical responses, but also his moral and strategic understanding, ensuring that when the final confrontation came, he would be prepared not only in skill, but in judgment, patience, and resilience. Through these encounters, Horus began to embody the balance that Isis had so carefully cultivated over the years. Strength was tempered by patience, courage guided by observation, action shaped by reflection and skill, reinforced by understanding. Isis's presence, though calm and quiet, was the foundation of this transformation, a constant source of guidance, reassurance, and devotion. Every challenge from Seth became not only a test of ability, but also a lesson in composure, strategy, and wisdom. And so, the marshes remained a place of quiet preparation, a realm where Horus faced challenges with patience and calm, guided by the unwavering devotion of Isis. Each day, each encounter, each reflection added to his growing understanding, shaping him into a warrior prepared not only to confront Seth, but to embody the principles of patience, courage, and wisdom that would define his destiny. The waters flowed steadily, the reeds swayed softly, and the night sky turned slowly above. The marshes were quiet in the early dawn, still damp with mist, the reeds swaying softly in the gentle wind. Horus moved carefully through the familiar paths, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Today was unlike any day before. Today, the lessons of years of observation, patience, courage, and wisdom would be tested in their fullest measure. Isis walked beside him, her calm presence reassuring, her eyes steady, her voice soft yet commanding as it carried over the soft murmurs of the marsh. "Remember all that you have learned," she whispered. "Patience first, clarity second, courage always. Act only when the moment is truly yours." The air seemed heavier, charged with the subtle presence of Seth, whose cunning and cruelty had grown more pronounced with every encounter. Horus felt the tension in the reeds, in the water, in the distant cries of birds. Every instinct, every lesson, every small skill honed over years rose to the surface in this moment. He crouched, observing the environment, sensing subtle shifts in wind, water, and shadow, feeling the pulse of life around him. Isis remained close, a quiet guide, offering both protection and gentle instruction, allowing Horus to act independently, yet supporting him with the strength of her presence. Seth emerged like a ripple of darkness across the marsh, his figure imposing, his movements deliberate and threatening. Horus's pulse remained steady, his muscles relaxed yet ready, his eyes calm and precise. He had learned from years of patient observation that fear would only cloud judgment, that haste could be fatal, and that clarity of mind was as crucial as strength of body. Isis's soft voice reminded him again, "Observe, anticipate, act. Do not strike blindly, strike with intention." Horus nodded, feeling the weight of her guidance as much as the lessons embedded in his own being. The first clash was subtle but precise. Seth moved with speed and cunning, testing Horus's ability to respond under pressure. The boy countered with deliberate timing, using reeds, water, and shadows as shields and guides. He moved not in anger, but with calculated precision, anticipating Seth's strikes and exploiting the patterns in the god's movements. Isis's magic, quiet and almost imperceptible, shaped protection into the marsh itself, reinforcing his awareness without overt interference. Each move, each breath, each thought was a culmination of years of preparation, teaching, and practice. The encounters escalated steadily, becoming more intricate and demanding. Seth tested not only Horus's strength, but also his ability to anticipate, adapt, and strategize. The currents of the river shifted unpredictably. The reeds bent in unexpected ways, and shadows twisted across the water in patterns that required careful interpretation. Horus responded with calm focus, observing the signals, measuring the risks, and acting with the precision that Isis had instilled in him. Her guidance remained constant, yet subtle, shaping not only his actions, but the very environment, allowing him to engage fully without being overpowered by fear or confusion. Horus's confidence grew with each maneuver, yet he maintained humility and patience, aware that overconfidence could lead to disaster. Isis reminded him gently, even in victory, remain aware. Even in strength, remain cautious. The smallest oversight can change the course of all. Horus internalized these words, moving with quiet determination, anticipating Seth's every feint, observing every subtle shift in the environment, and responding with calculated precision. His movements became a dance of strategy, awareness, and deliberate action. The Egyptians imagined these moments with meticulous detail, the reeds bending in the wind, the water rippling with each subtle motion, the distant cry of birds marking, the tension, the soft murmurs of Isis's guidance, blending with the ambient sound of nature. Horus moved through this environment with complete awareness, sensing the flow of the marsh, the currents of air, and the subtle signals that indicated Seth's next moves. Every action was deliberate, every breath measured, every thought disciplined. Isis's presence reinforced the lessons of patience, courage, and strategy, embedding them deep within his mind and spirit. The climactic moment approached as Seth attempted a more direct and forceful strike. Horus responded calmly, using every skill and lesson he had acquired. He anticipated the trajectory, adjusted his position, and acted with precision, not in haste, not in anger, but in deliberate calculation. The reeds, the currents, and the subtle energies of the marsh became extensions of his awareness, guiding his movements and providing both protection and opportunity. Isis's magic, quiet and supportive, ensured that the environment reinforced his strategy without removing the challenge, allowing him to confront Seth fully while remaining within the bounds of skill and wisdom. Horus began to recognize patterns in Seth's movements, subtle repetitions, even amid apparent chaos. He adapted his actions, countering not with raw force alone, but with observation, timing, and the careful application of strategy. Each maneuver was measured, each decision deliberate, each strike precise. Isis's teachings of patience, observation, courage, and restraint were realized in every aspect of his performance, guiding him to act not only with strength but with wisdom. The encounter continued, ebbing and flowing like the tides of the river itself. Seth attempted deception, shifting shapes, and unpredictable attacks, yet Horus remained focused. He observed, he waited, he acted with deliberate intent. Isis remained beside him, her calm presence a foundation of reassurance. Her subtle magic, reinforcing awareness, guiding him without interfering, allowing him to exercise judgment, courage, and skill. Horus felt the culmination of years of preparation, the embodiment of lessons learned, the integration of body, mind, and spirit into a single focused force of deliberate action. As the confrontation reached its height, Horus found the precise moment to act decisively. He had measured, observed, and waited. He struck, not with anger, not with haste, but with clarity and focus, using every skill, every observation, every subtle understanding of Seth's patterns. The god's form faltered, disrupted not only by strength, but by the disciplined application of wisdom, patience, and strategy. Isis's soft voice carried over the marsh, a quiet affirmation of the boy's readiness. You have observed, you have learned, you have acted. Let wisdom guide the final moment. Horus's final maneuver combined observation, patience, and courage in perfect harmony. He exploited the patterns Seth had revealed, responded to the god's movements with calculated precision, and maintained clarity of thought even under the pressure of confrontation. The reeds, the currents, the shadows all became extensions of his understanding, guiding and supporting his action. Isis's magic reinforced the environment subtly, ensuring balance rather than dominance, allowing Horus to complete the encounter with both skill and insight. With the final confrontation resolved, Seth retreated, not destroyed, but checked, humbled by the combination of skill, strategy, and wisdom embodied in Horus. The boy's chest rose and fell steadily, his mind calm, his awareness still sharp, his spirit reinforced by the culmination of years of patient instruction. Isis remained beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, her eyes soft yet proud. You have grown, she whispered. Strength, courage, patience, wisdom are yours now. Remember always that action guided by understanding is true power. Horus absorbed the moment, feeling the weight of lessons realized, the satisfaction of skill applied, the reassurance of Isis's guidance, and the quiet confidence of readiness. The marsh was calm again, the reeds swaying gently, the water reflecting, the soft light of the sun, the wind whispering through the reeds, as if acknowledging the completion of a significant trial. Every element, the natural world, the challenges, the instruction, and the confrontation converged to create a moment of perfect balance, a culmination of patience, training, and wisdom. Even as Seth withdrew, the lessons remained. Horus learned that victory was not simply the result of force, but of careful preparation, disciplined observation, and deliberate action. Courage without wisdom was insufficient. Strength without patience was dangerous. Isis's guidance had been subtle, yet complete, shaping not only the boy's skill, but his character, ensuring that when challenges arose in the wider world, he would face them with clarity, courage, and calm understanding. The Egyptians imagined Horus standing in the quiet marshes after the confrontation, the reeds swaying gently around him, the water reflecting the soft colors of the sky, the distant calls of birds marking the return of peace. Isis remained beside him, silent yet present, her magic and guidance woven seamlessly into the environment. Horus had passed the ultimate test of his youth, integrating lessons of patience, observation, courage, strategy, and wisdom. He had faced Seth directly and emerged not only victorious but transformed, ready to continue the journey that destiny had set before him. At night, as stars reflected on the still waters, Isis and Horus sat quietly, the soft murmur of the marsh enveloping them. She recounted the day's lessons, emphasizing patience, reflection, and the measured application of skill. Horus listened attentively, absorbing the guidance, integrating experience with instruction, and reflecting on the journey from a young child in the reeds to a capable, wise, and courageous heir of Osiris. Each moment became a meditation, each breath a reinforcement of calm, each movement a study in balance and observation. The story concluded here in the marshes,